What if I told you that $300,000 could buy you a tiny shoebox apartment in one city, but a sprawling home with a backyard in another? Today, we're taking a world tour to see how far $300,000 goes in real estate across China, the US, and Europe. In Shanghai, $300,000 might only fetch you about 35 square meters of apartment space. That's like 380 square feet, basically a one-bedroom high up in a skyscraper. Now jump to Texas, USA, with the same budget, you could get a 150 square meter house with 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a yard. Crazy contrast, right? And it doesn't stop there. In New York City, $300,000 barely buys a micro studio, but in rural Spain it could buy you an entire village, yes, literally an entire village. Stick around as we dive into real listings, average prices, and the cultural quirks behind these differences. Whether you're sipping coffee in Shanghai or ranching in Texas, $300,000 means very different homes and very different stories. So here's the challenge. Take $300,000 and try to buy a home in 9 different places: Shanghai, Shenzhen, Hangzhou, all in China, New York City and a city in Texas, Paris and Berlin in Europe, and a bonus stop in a Spanish countryside town. We'll pull up real market data from sites like Lianjia, for China, Zillow/Redfin, for the US, Idealista, for Spain, etc., to keep it real and up-to-date, 2024 to 2025 figures. Along the way we'll compare price per square meter, the size and type of home you'd get, condo versus house with garden, and some social insights, like why owning a home is such a big deal in some places, did someone say marriage pressure? And not in others. This video's structured with clear chapters. We'll start strong with jaw-dropping examples, then go deeper into each region, keeping it fun and engaging. Ready? Let's go house hunting around the world. Welcome to China, where owning an apartment in a big city can feel like winning a golden ticket, a very expensive golden ticket. In Shanghai, one of China's priciest markets, the average new apartment costs about 57,588 yen per square meter, roughly $8,000 per square meter. Do the math. $300,000 is 2.14 million renminbi, which buys you barely 35 to 37 square meters of space. That's like a cozy one-bedroom or even a studio in a high-rise. Over in Shenzhen, another ultra-expensive city, new apartments average about 52,700 yen per square meter, $7,350, so $300,000 would get you maybe 40 square meters. In other words, in China's Tier 1 cities you're getting a compact condo in the sky for $300,000. It'll likely be in a modern high-rise complex, maybe with 1 to 2 bedrooms if you're lucky, no yard of course, but perhaps a shared gym or garden in the development. These cities are dense, you trade space for the dynamic city life and bragging rights of owning property in Shanghai's skyline. It's not just Shanghai and Shenzhen. Hangzhou, while a notch down in price, are still steep. In Hangzhou's city center, prices are around $7,200 per square meter on average, whereas outside the center it's closer to $4,200 per square meter. So with $300,000, you might get 40 square meters in downtown Hangzhou, or maybe 65 to 70 square meters in a suburban area, perhaps enough for a small 2-bedroom in the outskirts. So yes, going to a slightly less pricey city or further from city center can double your space in China, but even then, we're talking apartments, not houses with white picket fences. Now, you might wonder, why on earth are people willing to pay so much for such small homes? Well, in China owning a home has huge social importance. In fact, a 2019 survey found over 80% of young Chinese women think owning a property is a crucial prerequisite for marriage. No house, no spouse, it's a common sentiment. Families often pool money to help a son buy a home so he can be a marriage material. This cultural norm puts intense pressure on young people to buy, even if it's a tiny flat. And it's not just about love, owning real estate is seen as a key to stability and status. As a result, homeownership in China is about 90%, one of the highest in the world. Imagine that, almost 9 in 10 families own their home, often a condo in the city. So, in summary, $300,000 in a Chinese megacity buys you a small high-rise condo, a slice of urban life, and also buys you into a culture where owning that slice means you've made it, and possibly that you can get married. Now leaving the skyscrapers of China, let's jet over to the United States, where $300,000 can mean dramatically different homes depending on the zip code. Time for a tale of 2 markets, New York City and Texas. First stop, New York City, specifically Manhattan, the land of eye-watering real estate. The median listing price in Manhattan is around $1,500 per square foot. For our metric friends, that's about $16,000 per square meter. So what does $300,000 get you in Manhattan? Roughly 200 square feet of space. Let that sink in. $300,000 equals 200 square feet, which is like an itty-bitty studio, basically a bedroom with maybe a tiny bathroom or kitchenette attached. In fact, it's hard to even find condos at $300,000 in Manhattan. Many are co-ops, a quirky NYC thing where you buy shares in a building. I saw examples of studios around $300,000 on listing sites, e.g., a one-room studio in Midtown or the Upper East Side. These places often come with catches like high monthly maintenance fees, some almost $2,000 a month. As one real estate report humorously noted, for $300,000 in Manhattan you might even end up looking at a studio, so small you choose between fitting a bed or a desk. True story, Manhattan is that expensive. So $300,000 in NYC gets you a slice of the Big Apple, emphasis on slice. Maybe a very thin slice. Now, to be fair, New York City isn't all Manhattan. In the other boroughs, say Brooklyn, Queens, or the Bronx, your $300,000 stretches a bit more. For example, in Queens, the average is around $450 per square foot in some areas, so $300,000 might get you 60M superscript 2, possibly a small one-bedroom co-op. In the Bronx, at $236 per square foot, as per some data, $300,000 could fetch 1,270 square feet, maybe a modest two-bedroom. Those are still apartments or attached homes, but noticeably larger than Manhattan. The bottom line, in NYC, location equals money. People pay a premium to be in the heart of the action, even if it means living in a pint-sized apartment. It's the classic location trade-off. You give up space for the New York lifestyle, walkability, culture, job opportunities, and that electric city vibe. Many New Yorkers are okay with a small pad because the city is their living room. But, yeah, it takes a certain tolerance for tight quarters. Okay, now hold on to your hat and let's fly to Texas. This is going to be the opposite experience. Texas is huge, and so are the houses. According to nationwide data, $300,000 in Texas buys about 1,647 square feet on average. That's roughly 153 square meters. In practical terms, we're talking a full-sized house, perhaps a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, maybe 1,600 to 1,800 square feet, often with a yard and garage. Think about a suburban Dallas or Houston neighborhood. $300,000 could snag a 10-year-old house with a 2-car garage, a lawn for BBQs, maybe even a community pool nearby. I checked Zillow for, say, Houston, plenty of listings in the $250,000 to $300,000 range for 3 to 4 bedroom houses 2,000 square feet. It's almost shocking if you've only seen New York prices. In fact, the price per square foot in Texas averages around $180, give or take, which is why your dollars go so much further. Land is cheaper, cities sprawl out, and construction costs are lower than NYC's high-rises. Culturally, this reflects the classic American real estate divide. In big coastal cities like NYC, San Francisco, people pay through the nose for a small space in a prime location. Meanwhile, in many parts of America, the South, Midwest, Texas, the American dream is still a big house with a yard. $300,000 can often buy the typical American dream home in those regions. It's worth noting, the U.S. homeownership rate is around 65%, and for many Americans, owning a detached house is the goal. They value space, privacy, and land, things Texas has in abundance. A popular saying, the farther from city centers, the bigger the houses. Texas embodies that. Also, when you buy in Texas, or anywhere in the U.S., you own the land, fee simple ownership. So you can plant a tree, build a deck, paint your door pink, it's your property. In Manhattan, you might not even own the walls without board approval. Co-ops can be strict. Next on our world tour, Europe. Let's look at 2 very different European cities, Paris and Berlin. These cities have history, culture, and of course, real estate quirks. Paris, city of lights, love, and lofty apartment prices. Paris consistently ranks among the most expensive cities in Europe. The average price is about €9,490 per square meter in Paris, about $10,000 per square meter at current exchange rates. So, our $300,000 would buy on the order of 28 to 30 square meters. Think of a charming little studio in a Haussmannian building, perhaps one chamber de bonne that's been renovated into a micro-apartment, or a tiny one-bedroom in an old building with tall windows. In practical terms, $300,000 in Paris might get you a studio or very small one-bedroom in neighborhoods outside the ultra-prime center. Maybe in areas like the 18th arrondissement, Montmartre area, or the periphery of Paris, you could find 30 square meters in that budget. If you insist on the fancy central areas, say, Saint-Germain or near the Eiffel Tower, €275,000 might only fetch a studio under 20 square meters, if anything. Paris apartments are known for being beautiful but compact. Many buildings are 5 to 6 stories walk-ups from the 1800s, cut into small flats. So $300,000 gives you a slice of that Parisian charm, likely with features like a tiny balcony or a historic beam in the ceiling, but you'll be strategizing storage because space is tight. It's the price of living in a postcard city. And by the way, many Parisians rent. Homeownership in cities like Paris is not sky-high because of these costs. France's overall homeownership is around 65%, but in Paris city it's lower. So owning any apartment in Paris is a bit of a status symbol, or a family inheritance. Now, Berlin. Berlin has an interesting real estate story. For years after reunification, Berlin was cheap for a capital city. It had a surplus of housing, a culture of renting, and even laws controlling rent increases. But in the last decade Berlin's popularity soared, and so have prices. Still, compared to Paris, and many other capitals, Berlin is relatively affordable. The average price is about €5,379 per square meter in Berlin, roughly $5,500,600 per m superscript 2. With $300,000, you could afford around 50 to 55 square meters of apartment space. That's about 540 to 600 square feet, maybe a comfortable one-bedroom or even a smaller two-bedroom in some parts of town. In neighborhoods like Charlottenburg or Prenzlauer Berg, €275,000 might get a one-bedroom around 50 square meters in an Altbau, a lovely old building. In a less central area, you might get something a bit bigger or a modern flat. Crucially, Berliners often rent. Germany's homeownership rate is famously low, under 50%, and in Berlin City it's even lower. Renting is normal, with strong tenant rights. So buying property is less of a must-do than in China or the US. Many young Berliners are lifelong renters. That said, investors and rising demand have pushed prices up, and there's been public outcry over affordability. They even attempted a rent freeze law recently. But compared to Paris, Berlin's $6K per m superscript 2 versus $10,000 plus in Paris shows you get more bang for your buck in Berlin. The housing culture in Europe is quite diverse. In Paris, people value owning an apartment but accept it'll be small, the city is dense, the buildings are old, and people sacrifice space for city life. 200 square feet for $300,000? They make it work with clever use of space, and lots of visits to the cafe downstairs. In Germany, there isn't the same social pressure to buy. Renting long-term is common, and there are even laws that make renting stable. You can have indefinite leases, etc. The mindset is, a rented flat can still be a home for life. So owning a home isn't synonymous with success in Germany as it might be in China or the US. Berlin's relatively lower prices reflect that historical attitude, though it's changing now. To put it in perspective, $300,000 in Paris equals starter flat, maybe for a single or couple. $300,000 in Berlin equals a decent-sized apartment that a small family could live in. If we picked another European city for fun, say Madrid, Spain, the average is around €5,700 per square meter, so similar to Berlin, you'd get 50 square meters for $300,000. In London, not in our main list but famous for high prices, $300,000 might not buy anything in central London, you'd have to go far out. Every city has its own story, but broadly, Western European capitals equals pricey per m superscript 2, smaller spaces, but there's relief in second-tier cities or outskirts. Now, speaking of relief, what if we leave the big cities entirely? Let's check out that rural Spanish town I hinted at. You won't believe how far $300,000 can stretch in the countryside. Pack your bags, we're heading to the Spanish countryside. In parts of rural Spain, $300,000 is a fortune in real estate terms. How extreme can it get? Well, consider this true story. An entire abandoned village in Spain, Salto de Castro in Zamora, was on the market for just €260,000, and it sold for €300,000. Yes, for the price of a one-bed in the city, someone bought 44 houses, a school, a church, and a civil guard barracks in the Spanish countryside. Let that sink in, 44 houses. Sure, they were dilapidated, ghost village vibes, but still. Essentially, $300,000 bought a small town. That's an extreme example, but it highlights the massive urban-rural divide. More commonly, with $300,000 in rural Spain, you could buy a large standalone house. For instance, on Idealista, Spain's Zillow, you can find country homes, say in regions like Asturias or Andalusia, for €150,000 to €250,000 that are 200 to 300 square meters and come with gardens or even orchards. So $300,000 could easily get you a 5-bedroom renovated farmhouse on a few acres in some quaint village. Price per square meter? It can be as low as €500 to €1,000 per square meter in depopulated areas, peanuts compared to city prices. Some regions in Spain, like parts of Galicia, Castilla, have so many people who left for cities that houses are just sitting empty. For example, I saw a listing of a rustic 4-bed house on a large plot for around €100,000, which is like $110,000, meaning you could buy 2 or 3 such homes with a $300,000 budget. Let's put all these comparisons into perspective with a quick table. Here's a visual rundown of price per square meter and how much space, on average, $300,000 can buy in each location we've talked about. Looking at the table, you can see the massive range. Shanghai and Paris are up near $8K, $10K per m superscript 2, giving you well under 40 square meters of home for $300,000. New York, Manhattan, is off the charts in $/m superscript 2, hence the tiny 18 square meter slice of apartment. Meanwhile, at the other extreme, Texas and rural Spain offer huge spaces, literally 10 times more space or greater for the same money compared to the big global cities. Texas is around $2K per m superscript 2, that's $182 per square foot, and rural Spain can be even lower. It's almost hard to believe until you see the listings side by side. This table really drives home, no pun intended, how location dominates real estate value. But beyond the numbers, it's about lifestyle and societal context, which we'll talk about next. So, what does our $300,000 house hunt tell us about each society? It turns out, a lot more than just real estate. It reveals cultural values, economic systems, and lifestyle priorities. For China, the fact that $300,000 buys so little in Shanghai or Shenzhen highlights how competitive and crowded these cities are. It's not just market forces, it's cultural. Chinese society places immense importance on owning a home. Parents often start saving for a child's future home when the kid is little. Why? Owning a home is tied to family reputation and security. As we discussed, there's a saying, no house, no marriage. This creates societal pressure that keeps demand high, even at crazy prices. For United States, the $300,000 contrast between NYC and Texas touches on the classic American themes of urban versus suburban life. In New York, and similar big cities, we see a shift. Many people, especially younger professionals, are okay renting or living small in exchange for city amenities. But traditionally, the U.S. ethos has been bigger is better when it comes to homes. The suburban house with a yard has been the American dream for decades. It's tied to ideas of independence, privacy, and success. Even today, about 65% of Americans own their homes, and most of those are single-family houses. That said, high prices in top cities have made renting more common and acceptable for longer. Society is sort of split. You have folks in expensive coastal cities who value the experience of city living over house size, and folks in more affordable regions who prioritize space and ownership. Europe is diverse, but one thing stands out: history and housing traditions. Cities like Paris are old, buildings weren't made for modern huge living spaces. Culturally, Europeans, especially in big cities, often accept a smaller living space as the norm. It's common for a middle-class family in Paris to live in, say, an 70 square meters, 750 square feet apartment. That's just city life. Homeownership rates vary. France and Spain have fairly high ownership, whereas Germany is low, reflecting that long-term renting culture. In Berlin, many people are lifelong renters, and that wasn't stigmatized, it was just how it is. There's also a difference in attitude toward real estate as investment. In Spain or France, people do invest in property. Spaniards love owning second homes on the coast, for example, but there's also a strong tradition of keeping property in the family, passing it down, and not flipping houses frequently. In Germany, because renting was prevalent, housing was seen more as a necessity, not a get-rich investment, historically. These attitudes are shifting somewhat, with globalization of real estate, but they still influence policy. Ultimately, how far $300,000 goes highlights what each society values and struggles with. In China, it's about securing one's place in a competitive urban environment, often driven by family expectations. In the US, it's about choice and the freedom to pursue space or urban excitement, with inequality in who gets to choose, of course. In Europe, it's about balancing cherished city heritage with modern needs, and trying not to leave the countryside behind. It also shows how housing is intertwined with policy. So, next time you hear someone complain, "Ugh, $300,000 can't get anything decent here," you can remind them, that same money could buy a palace or a closet, depending on where you go. Real estate is wild like that. It's not just numbers, it's a reflection of a place's history, economy, and culture. I hope this little around-the-world tour entertained you and maybe got you thinking, what kind of home and life would you choose with $300,000? A chic but tiny city pad overlooking the skyline? A suburban family home with a backyard? Or perhaps a quiet country retreat, complete with an entire village? The beauty is, at least in theory, the world is your oyster, and you can pick the trade-off that suits your heart and wallet. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments which city's real estate surprised you the most. If you enjoyed this globe-trotting house hunt, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more insightful adventures in finance, culture, and life.